The movie begins with a gruesome scene of a battlefield during the Viking era. The field was full of dead bodies scattered everywhere. Eirik, who had been mortally wounded during the battle, was being cradled by Sven. Beorhtric's brother and 2 other men arrive and find the dying man. Before passing away, Eirik tells his brother that he would be king now and that he should rule very well. The story is narrated by the departed Eirik, who tells the tale about a time when a pathway could be opened between heaven, earth, and hell, and the Viking gods used unholy relics as keys to unlock the gates and reign over men. Over time, the tales fade into myths, and men stopped worshipping the Viking gods and started to embrace the Christian god. Yet one of the gods, the god of thunder, did not forget this, and he decided to take the form of a man so he could find keys and restore the Viking gods to their former glory. In the land of men, a city had fallen under attack from Norsemen led by the god of thunder. They sailed across the sea where they lay siege around the city, and the army breaks through the city's defenses and slaughters every man, woman, and child. Once the city had fallen, Thor heads to the abbey and takes one of the keys the priests had been safekeeping. Across the land, Eirik was out in the snow hunting a bear. After stalking it for some time and putting 3 arrows in its back, Eirik pulls out a knife and takes on the bear by hand. After a bit of struggle, he stabs the bear and kills it instantly. Eirik packs his winnings and heads back to the cabin, and at his house, Eirik is surprised by Frey, who would come to bring him news of an upcoming war. Frey tells Eirik that Thor had returned and had gathered a large army. Frey tells Eirik that he must stop Thor, but Eirik is skeptical because he's just a man, while Thor is a god. Frey tells Eirik that he wasn't just an ordinary man because he'd been brought back from the dead by the goddess Freya, who was apparently his lover. Frey informs Eirik that he was now an undead, and only the undead could pass through Halaheim and get to Midgard. He tells him that there was a special gilded horn in Halaheim that could be used to push Thor out of the human body that he was encapsulating and back to the spirit world where he belongs. Frey tells Eirik to begin his journey by first going to Osberg, where he would find a wizard by the name of Alcuin, and he would be able to lead Eirik to the gates of hell. After informing him of his upcoming conquest, Frey leaves Eirik to his thoughts. As told, Eirik gets ready to start his journey, but before continuing, he heads over to his friend Sven's house to ask for a boat. Sven tells him that the boat was no longer his, but he would help him figure something out so the two would head to Osberg together. On their way, they encounter a slave trader who'd been transporting a slave by the name of Yang and set him free. Once they reach Osberg, they find that the upset slave trader had set a trap for them by getting his friends to try to kill them, and the 2 warriors feared nothing, for they had years of experience on battlefields, and with that, they incapacitated their attackers with the help of Yang, and they win the fight. After the fight, Eirik asks Yang if he would like to join them on his journey, and Yang agrees, and all 3 go to see King Karl Redbeard. And they went there because Eirik wishes to seek his counsel. After being granted an audience, Eirik and his friends were treated to a meal while King Karl explained to Eirik that the wizard Alkin was no longer living in the town. Karl tells Eirik that a group of warriors had come to town and had taken the wizard with them to their leader Halfor. He explained that if Eirik wished to find Alkin, he would need a ship and more men so he can cut through these warriors and get to the wizard. That night, Karl throws a feast in the name of Eirik, who uses that chance to inspire men to join his cause. A few men agreed to go with him, as well as Bryna, a woman that was eager to join his team. But Eirik refuses, telling her that the journey was not suitable for a lady. In the morning, the men gather and head over to the boat where Eirik finds Bryna waiting for him, and even though Eirik told her not to come, he had to make concessions because she was the new owner of Sven's boat. Unable to do anything about the matter, Eirik agrees and the crew begins their journey across the sea. After sailing for a long time, the crew finally make it to land. They get off the boat to find an abandoned looking town that was too quiet and seemed ominous. Suddenly, the quiet is broken by a sharp yelling of dozens of men who come running out of every house. They swarm Eirik and his people, starting an unexpected battle. Eirik and his team fight valiantly, cutting down every man that came their way. And after the battle was over, Eirik and Bryna head toward the prison where the enemies were keeping the wizard. There they find Alcuin in a cage and release him, and Eirik explains to the wizard that he had come to save him so that Alcuin could take him to the gates of hell, where he would cross over and bring the horn. Although skeptical, Alcuin agrees to lead Eirik to the gates of hell. Eirik and his men board the boat once more and start their journey to the gates. During the boat ride, Alcuin tells Eirik that on his journey to Halaheim, he would encounter a hound who has no eyes but senses the living and the dead. After informing him of the perils that he'd be facing, Alcuin points ahead to the water and tells Eirik that they've arrived. He informs Eirik that they would need to swim far and deep to reach the gate. Then Eirik prepares himself for the chilling waters and takes in a deep breath and dives in. After swimming deep into the sea, Eirik finally sees the gate and heads toward it, and inside, he slowly makes his way across the sleeping hound and deep into Halaheim when suddenly the lost souls awaken and start attacking him. Although he tries to fight them off, he is overwhelmed and almost drowns under the sea of dead souls that were trying to consume him. But suddenly, one of the dead creatures comes to the rescue and chases away the rest, freeing Eirik from their grip. Eirik looks at the man who had come to save him and realizes that it was his father. Confused, Eirik asks his father why he was there instead of Valhalla, and his father tells him that he was a coward in life and that he belongs in hell. His father then continues to confess a secret that he held all his life, and he tells Eirik that he wasn't actually his father. He tells him that his mother had been tricked one night by a man wearing his face, and she slept with him because she thought it was her husband, and that was how Eirik had come to be born. Although sad by what he heard, Eirik knows he must continue on his mission, so he asks his father where he would be able to find the horn. His father then takes him to the Gate of Souls where they'll be able to find the horn. And there, Eirik encounters so many beautiful women that try to seduce him into staying there forever. After almost being convinced, Eirik is dragged out by his father with the horn in hand. He then gets back to his crew who were happy to see that he was not dead. After recovering from the exhausting mission, Eirik regains his strength and shows the horn to Alkin and then asks him what he needs to do next. Alkin then tells Eirik that Thor would be at the Henge of Stones for the blood eclipse, and that's the only time that Thor would be able to use the key. Eirik knows that even if he had the horn, he would still need to go through the large army Thor had gathered, and he decides to go to his brother and ask for an army to help battle the enemy. Deciding that it was the only course of action he could take, Eirik and his crew sail towards Jomsburg. Once they arrive, they are greeted by a group of men on a small boat who ask them why they're there. And Eirik recognizes the man and reminds him of the time that he saved his life, and shocked to see his old friend, the man greets Eirik warmly and takes him and some of his crew members back to the city. Inside the fort, Eirik is presented in front of his brother Beorhtric, who does not seem pleased to see him. Beorhtric fears that Eirik had returned to reclaim the throne, and he tells Eirik that he changed the way that he rules, and that his army now work as mercenaries for anyone that can pay good money. Eirik assures his brother that he did not return for the crown and explains the mission that he'd been entrusted with. And although Eirik does his best to convince him, Beorhtric does not listen and he puts him under arrest. So the guards take him to the dungeon and they start torturing Eirik. Seeing the betrayal Eirik had suffered, Ymar takes a small boat and heads out to the rest of Eirik's crew to inform them of what happened. Yang, Bryna, and the wizard return to the fort with Ymar in hopes of freeing their captured friend. Aided by a magical mist created by Alkin, Yang and Bryna sneak into the dungeon, and on their way, they encounter some of the king's men and are forced to fight their way through. Once they make it to the cells, they find their crew and a battered Eirik sitting on the floor looking defeated. After they free their friends, Eirik and his men make their way to the throne room where they confront his brother. Beorhtric tells Eirik that Thor had offered him many kingdoms for him to rule as he sees fit, and Eirik promises Beorhtric that once he has defeated Thor, he would be returning for him so he can have his reckoning. Beorhtric mocks his brother and reveals that Alkin, the wizard that Eirik risked his life to save, had betrayed him and has given the horn to Beorhtric. The king orders the recapture of Eirik and orders his death, and the guards take Eirik and his men away, but on their way they whisper that they would help him escape and even join his mission to destroy Thor. Keeping their promise, the guards sneak the prisoners away and hide them in the village so they can manage to rest before sailing. While Eirik cleans his wounds, Bryna comes in and offers to help him, and she asks him if they could fight without the horn, but he tells her that it's the only weapon that can destroy Thor. Enthralled by his bravery, Bryna offers Eirik her body, but he refuses, telling her that he's already promised his heart to another. Suddenly, Freya appears in the body of Bryna and tells him that she wants him to live his life to the fullest even though they can't be together. Convinced by what she said, Eirik decides to open his heart to Bryna and they spend the night together. At the palace, the guards approach the king to inform him that some of the men had betrayed him and sided with his brother, but they find that Beorhtric had been poisoned and they suspect that it was the wizard that did it. In the morning, Eirik meets the new army, the guards from the night before, and together they head toward the stone hedges. The army make it to the destination just as the eclipse starts to show in the sky. As the two armies meet, a devastating battle begins as each side fights to destroy the other. Although Eirik and his men were outnumbered almost 5-1, they had cut through Thor's army fighting courageously. And after a long and strenuous battle, Eirik manages to go through the army and makes his way to the stone hedges just in time to find Thor getting ready for the eclipse. He tells Thor that even though he doesn't have the horn, he'd come to stop him and that he would die trying. And suddenly, Thor reveals the horn that Alkin had stolen. He then starts to talk about how he was actually Eirik's father, who was the same man who wore his father's face years ago and impregnated his mother. He asks Eirik to join him as his son so they may rule the world together, but Eirik refuses. Disappointed by his answer, Thor attacks Eirik, beginning the battle. Eirik and his friends try their best to take down Thor, but he proves to be too powerful for them. Tired of the fight, Thor decides to end his son. He picks up a dagger and lunges it directly toward Eirik, but before he could, Bryna got in the way and saves Eirik. Angry and shocked by what happened, Eirik picks up Thor's hammer and hits him with it, incapacitating Thor, his father. He then picks up the horn and blows it, but nothing happens, and as he sits there confused, Frey appears and tells him that he had lied to him. The horn was never meant to send Thor away, but to open the gates of heaven and hell. Eirik asks Frey why he had done this, and the angry god explains that the betrayal of humans needed to be punished. The eclipse was now full in the sky, and once it was complete, the ritual started. A whirlwind engulfs the area, causing concern to Frey and Thor because they know this wasn't supposed to happen. As they struggle to hold on to the stones and keep themselves from being blown away, Alquin appears and reveals that he'd given the gods a fake horn. And that's exactly why the whirlwind appeared and the ritual malfunctioned. And so, the gods are forced back into Valhalla, and soon after, the eclipse passes, opening up the sky to the beautiful yellow sun. Eirik holds Bryna as her soul slowly leaves her body, and he and his friends gather their dead and give them a Viking burial, honoring all who had given their lives for the righteous cause.